The truth is, I'm only human, kids. Now, I talk a lot of spirituality, I talk a lot of personal development on this show these days. But the truth is, I talk about it because I struggle so mightily with it. And I'm in a period right now where I'm having a bit of trouble with some of the old familiar demons, man. And so what I'm presenting today is a way of understanding and reframing these difficult times into something more useful, positive, and productive, okay? And along the way, I'm also talking about a band I was introduced to this week that somehow I missed on the radar that I am learning very quickly to really, really love. So I hope you will come along with me on this journey as we once again confront that stuff that needs confronted in our lives, man. It's going to be hopefully a useful one, definitely a challenging one, certainly a challenging one for me to undertake. But I'm trying to be vulnerable here, kids. I'm trying to be a little bit raw. I hope you get something from it as I have, and we'll get to it on the other side. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. So where is the line? I mean the TMI line. There are loads of podcasts out there where the host is more than happy, perfectly content to describe in full, colorful, and explicit detail the workings of their bodies, bodily fluids, and mechanics, the expression thereof. And in fact, those shows tend to do a lot better than my show does. So maybe it's time to go into the full gory details, not necessarily of my bodily fluids and expressions, but of my existential fluids and expressions. I don't want to be the sort of host who sweeps my ashes into your fireplace. The truth is, I talk about a lot of spirituality. I talk about a lot of personal development on this program, more so lately than I have in the past. Becoming more comfortable with that, but there's a temptation sometimes to turn this into a personal therapy session, and I don't want to do that because I have a therapist, and that's what therapy's for, right? The truth is, I talk about all this stuff because I struggle with all of this stuff, and you may think it irrational, maybe even insane, possibly self-indulgent, that I express these struggles publicly, and I talk about this stuff publicly, and I go round and round and round the twist, trying to decide if this is just a massive ego exercise or if I'm actually offering something useful to you, the listening public. But the truth is, I'm very reluctant all the time and very vigilant about not coming off as though I have any of this figured out, or as though I'm some sort of expert. Now, I have made strides. I have made a great deal of personal progress wrestling with my personal demons. But sometimes, kids, the truth is the demons get the upper hand. And so it has been over the past few days, 3, 4, 5 days. I've been wrestling with some of this stuff and frankly losing. And so I enter this recording phase right now here in my makeshift studio, and please, whatever wood you can find, be it your desk or your head, knock on it now, and next week I'll be back in my little studio recording again, holding out great hope for that, kids, because frankly I'm done with this freaking reno, and I'm done with life being upside down. And that's a contributing factor to my existential ennui over the past few days. I've been struggling a bit with some of the old stuff that still exists within me about feelings of inadequacy, about imposter syndrome, about some of the stuff that I've talked about recently. And what I was going to do today was talk about this concept of music being a crucible and what that actually means, because I talk about that a lot. But the truth is, all life is a freaking crucible, all right? And a crucible, traditionally, a crucible is a pot, a container, some sort of vessel that is used in alchemy or that is used in processes whereby things have to be heated very, very hot. So melting metal, combining elements, heating them to a point of melting so as to extract the impurities from them and create something more pure, more strong from the combined elements, all right? When I talk about music being a crucible, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about music being an amazing melting pot for extracting your weaknesses, extracting your impurities, and melting them into something stronger. And that was going to be the crux of this week's episode, because I know I've said that a lot. Music is a great crucible for all the personal development stuff. And it is. But the truth is, everything is a crucible. All life is a crucible. All life is a testing ground. I don't mean testing as in exam, but I mean testing as in testing impurities, testing weaknesses, drawing them out, heating them, purifying them. Life is this process of purification. And the truth is, sometimes it gets hotter than other times. Past few days, things have been hot over here as I've been wrestling with some of the deeply rooted stuff in my own psyche, my own history, my own existence. And here I am, kind of tiptoeing on this fault line of what is TMI and what is just me being self-indulgent. But I don't want to give the impression that I got it all figured out, because the reason I talk about all this stuff is that I don't. And I think a lot of people are encouraged and comforted by the fact that, other people don't have it figured out too. And sometimes it takes a lunatic voice like mine out there saying, guess what? I'm struggling with this, to make other people realize it's okay to struggle with this. I use music because it's been, over the last 10 years, the most amazing crucible for me. I think of all the things, all the weaknesses in my character, all the weaknesses in my thinking, all of the stuff that's bothered me my whole life that has been extracted through the crucible of music. We go back to the very beginning stages when I'd been out of the game for a very long time, hadn't performed in front of people for a very long time. And then I began playing drums again, and things inevitably began to flow towards that. And I had this sense of wanting to use all this work I was putting into the instrument, into the drums, but being very afraid to even jam with strangers at a certain point. Because and this is not news to anybody who listens, but I was afraid to be found out. There is this fundamental self-doubt in me, this fundamental feeling of not being good enough, feeling of inadequacy that needed to be wrestled with. The only way to overcome these shadows is to pull them out into the open. And that's what a crucible does. You put a piece of metal into the crucible and you melt down the weaknesses and the impurities within it. And what is left is a much more pure and therefore much more strong compound, right? So this fundamental feeling of inadequacy in me, wherever it comes from, and that is not the topic of the day. That's for me and my therapist. Wherever it comes from, it is a limiting element of my life. It is a limiting belief. It is a limiting identity. And it needed, at a certain point in time, to be pulled out and reckoned with. Not pulled out and fought with, Not pulled out and killed or destroyed, but pulled out, listened to, acknowledged, reabsorbed, melted down into something more pure, something more powerful, something stronger, right? And so the initial phases of music put me in a place where I had to confront this feeling of inadequacy, and I had to test it. I had to stand up against it. I had to test whether it's true. Am I good enough or am I not good enough? And so it begins with simply jamming with a couple of people. Then a band is formed, and it's like I'm floating. I'm doing okay. It's a challenge to this identity of not being a good enough drummer, and by extension, not being a good enough or a valuable human being. And so that initial fundamental flaw that needed to be purified was extracted in the early phases of just getting together with strangers, making music, and then forming a band and realizing I fit in the band and that I occupy a place in the band and that I contribute to the band and that what I'm bringing is good enough as a player, as a writer, as a band member, learning all of this stuff and then developing a stronger sense of identity and personal value around that. And then it takes the next step where you've got to play out. That's what a band ultimately wants to do. Play gigs, play shows. And then that puts me into the crucible again. And it's extracting further fears of inadequacy and feelings and fears of humiliation. All these things are pointing at your fears. What did I fear initially? Not being good enough to jam with people, being found out. We've talked about this before. What did I fear playing out? Screwing up, being humiliated, being pointed at, being laughed at. This all points to deeply rooted childhood fears, ultimately probably of abandonment. But, afraid to play out, and then having to face that, and then realizing I could do it, and I did okay, and then learning to really love it immediately. I was reminded of that first show I played with Hearts. Oh yeah, this is fun. I forgot the part where it's fun. And then surging into this new identity as a person who could do that, and then playing more shows and becoming more and more comfortable, and then adopting this purified, stronger identity, the confidence, feeling that I have value, and proving it in this slightly bigger testing ground of performing live, shaking that shadow out, shaking out that feeling of inadequacy, and testing it in the crucible of playing live. And then I'm being hired by people. And I'm a hired gun now. I never saw that coming. And then I'm playing new shows. And then I'm really getting into, the higher up the level you go, the deeper shadows that get pulled out, the deeper impurities that get pulled up in the crucible to be reckoned with. And my attachments are a really, really big one. So much suffering I have put on myself through attachment. And then all of a sudden, you're playing with an artist and you derive a certain sense of identity from being connected to that artist. And you see the potential in that artist. And you see where it could go, and you see where you want to go, and you begin to sense things happening. And you become identified as the person who plays with that artist. And then you make, in my case, the really bad green rookie mistake. Not a bad mistake, just a green mistake of thinking that the artist's thing is your thing. Ooh, that's a lesson you need to learn as a side player, man. Doesn't matter how long you've been around. Doesn't matter what you've done. Doesn't even matter what the artist may or may not have said to you. The artist's thing is not your thing, but you become identified with it. You become attached to it. And then when you become attached to something, you begin to fear losing it, right? And this is not about music for me. This is, again, fundamental, deeply rooted childhood stuff that I have either skirted around or ignored until the crucible made it impossible to ignore anymore. I'm attached to this artist or this band or that band or this position or this identity or this reputation. And the crucible of music pulls it out, because what happens? You maybe lose that gig, or you lose that position, you lose that band, or you lose that identity. And all of a sudden, this shadow you've got, this impurity you've got, that's all about needing the external validation, needing the identity that comes with being attached to that project, it gets blown away. And you have to face this notion. You test again this notion of whether you're valid without that, what your identity is without that. And losing something sucks. And fearing losing something sucks. And this is all the attachment. And again, I ignored a lot of this for a long time, or I put myself in easy positions where it wasn't at risk. But then you start playing with an artist and you identify with that artist and that chair and you value it and you put so much into it so as to preserve it and protect your position. And as a side player, no position is preservable or protectable. It just isn't, kids, no matter what you do. And it doesn't mean you don't give your best and try your hardest, but you need to not attach, because there's nothing to be attached to except an identity that comes with a certain position. And I so desperately needed this external validation to tell me I was good enough, not just as a drummer, good enough as a human being, ultimately, that I attached very, very hard to a lot of positions. And attachment causes suffering. The Buddha told us that. All suffering is about attachment. And I had to learn the hard freaking way, lose a couple of chairs, not quite get chairs that maybe I was worthy of, and was attached to the notion of those things. And again, this crucible of music brought these attachments up to be purified, brought them up to be melted, brought them up to be reckoned with at a time when they needed to be. Because what happens is, if you become attached to so many things all the time, you lose yourself. You lose yourself. You do not put on yourself the validation that only you can give yourself the validation, kids. That's the thing. You look for it from outside, and that is flimsy. That is extremely superficial. Feels good in the moment, but it ain't real. All right, you can pull a certain sense of accomplishment from it. You can feel good about it, but the ultimate validation has to come from within. Now, I never gave myself that for whatever reason it is. I've got deeply rooted stuff. I never gave myself the validation, and so you find yourself in a position where you're getting it finally, externally, but it doesn't matter because you lose that validation. You're right back where you started. The validation has to come from within. And so music, the Crucible, forced me to reckon with these attachments. And I'm driving down the highway in Germany, doubled over from a gallbladder attack that's caused by attachment to a position or a hope or an idea. You know what I mean? I'm forcing this on myself. It is my own internal clenching, holding on. Roots in my gallbladder doubles me over. Music is the crucible that forced me ultimately to face the reality of these attachments. You don't even know they're happening, but you've got this incredible fear of losing a job, losing a relationship, losing a status in some way. And suddenly you're forced to contend with it. What is this doing to me? It's causing me untold freaking suffering. Attachment is causing me so much suffering. And I had to go through years of this suffering to finally begin to understand the message it was delivering to me. I attached to external things in lieu of having my own sense of value and self-worth, recognizing my own ability, recognizing my own potential, recognizing my own value, not just as a drummer, but as a human being. And music is the crucible that forced me to contend with this shadow, pulled it up to be melted and purified. And I'm not all the way there. I am so much better than I used to be in terms of attaching to things, attaching to people, attaching to gigs. Like, stuff slides off of me so much better than it used to, but I'm not all the way there, and I won't pretend that I am. In the last few days, a lot of the stuff that I was hoping I was past has resurfaced in kind of, I was going to say violent ways, but I don't mean physically violent. I mean existentially violent ways. Part of it's the renovation, part of it's just straight up fatigue, but stuff that I don't like about myself, stuff that contributes to my feelings of inadequacy far outside of music, has just been pulled up and put in my face again to be contended with. And sometimes you look at that and you think, why? Why, life, are you pushing this on me again? Will you screw off and leave me alone? But then you have to take, if you can, a more optimistic view that says, well, life is presenting this to me right now. The crucible is melting this at me right now because I can handle it, because I'm ready for it. Sometimes that's a leap, man. Sometimes that takes a special level of strength. Say, okay, I'm contending with this right now because it's in me. It's painful. It's a thing that needs to be purified. More feelings of inadequacy, more lack of value, more unwillingness to stand up for myself because I don't feel as though I can. And okay, we have to contend with that again. The melting burns. The crucible burns, man. It can be freaking painful, but you've got to look at it like a melting point, like a purification process. And ultimately, in the case of music, the great shadow is just ego. It has ultimately forced me to contend with ego. The pandemic was also an enormously powerful crucible for that. All of this pointing me in the direction of pulling out these ego attachments to wanting validation, to feeling good enough, to feeling as though I'm a valuable person on some level. Music and the pandemic, these things have forced me to reckon with just how much my ego has been in charge of things. And then I think to myself, well, I'm doing a lot better. I don't attach to positions anymore. I don't attach so much to artists anymore. I'm much better at just rolling with what happens. Easy come, easy go. It's all right. I know what I do. I know what I've got. I have value. It's okay. I can let it slide. And then, over the past few days, stuff comes out that just shakes my ego attachments to the core again. And I deflate. And I sit down and I'm like, oh man, how are we here again? I thought I was doing so much better. And in some ways I am. And I know I'm being vague about this because, again, I don't want to sweep my ashes into your fireplace. It's my stuff to contend with. The point I'm making is that I was going to say music is a crucible, but the truth is life is a crucible. Everything you do on some level becomes a crucible if it pulls out of you the weaknesses, the false beliefs, the prejudices, anything that needs to be reckoned with, recognized, reabsorbed, alchemized. Man, this is about alchemy. It's about melting things down, releasing their impurities, and what is left is a completely pure and much stronger compound, as I said. I use music as the example because so much of what I've had to contend with about myself, my lack of self-worth, lack of self-confidence, lack of feeling of value, a personal loathing. I don't know if everybody has this. Probably on some level they do. I have not liked myself for most of my freaking life. And at times I still don't. And music has been the crucible, the melting pot, the vessel for me to contend with these things. And so when I say music is an amazing crucible, that's what I'm talking about. But so is your relationship, past, present. Any relationship you've had that made you crazy is asking you to confront a shadow or a fear. Your job can be a crucible, the things that you hate, the people that you hate at your job, your boss, maybe even your whole company. If it forces you to contend with a fear, a frustration, a jealousy, an anger, whatever forces you to confront those things and actually inquire into where they come from, that is a crucible. And we need them. Those of us who are on the personal development journey, because we need to personally develop. Those of us who are on the spiritual journey, who want to ascend and are being blocked here and there and everywhere from that ascension need crucibles, because the crucibles are what help you identify and melt away and purify the blocks. I have so many blocks still. I have overcome, to a certain degree, so many of the fundamental ones. And I look back now and I look at the last 10 years of being in music and, to a certain extent, slogging it out in music. I haven't knocked over all of them, man. There are a lot of dominoes still to be felled. But so many of them I have been able to identify and confront in this crucible of music. And so I ask you, a lot of you are musicians as well, what in your experience of music has forced out a shadow for you, has forced you to look at a pettiness, a jealousy, an anger, a rage, a feeling of inadequacy, a fear of any kind? What in your musical experience has forced you to confront that and overcome? What about your relationships, your work? Pickleball. Pickleball is a crucible. If, like me, you get so down on yourself when you play badly, even in recreational, low-stakes pickleball with your friends. You got that easy put away and you smash it long by a foot and you begin to lose your freaking mind. I'm doing a lot better with that too. But I've been in a vulnerable state, kids. Vulnerability really sells well. I've been in a vulnerable state because I've been shaken again by a lot of this ego stuff, shaken again by this feelings of inadequacy. And, I struggle along trying to get an income together, trying to get a regular job, trying to swim as I sink, in music. A lot of that stuff shakes you. But if you find yourself in this arena, if you find yourself in this crucible, I think you need to look at it like, okay, life has placed me in this crucible because it's time and I'm able to handle this crucible. And the temptation is to get angry and lash out or get bitter or become despondent or become depressed, all of which is an avoidance of what the crucible is trying to teach you. The crucible does not want you to get angry and lash out, all right? The crucible might want you to learn to stand up for yourself, but not in an aggressive or a violent way. The crucible does not want you to become depressed. The crucible wants you to confront the reason for your depression, right? The crucible wants you to look at what need is not being met here by you, probably, or what needs to change. Instead of just becoming depressed, as this is the temptation for me, and to throw up my hands and sit down and stick out my lower lip. And please do not think that is me belittling depression. All right, I've been there. It is a freaking nightmare. It is a whole other identity taking over your life, and it's awful. But in the crucible wants you to look at your depression and ask what the root of it is. It wants you to reckon with, to purify that depression. All right, feel it, absolutely feel it, but reckon with what it is, where it comes from. Sometimes the crucible's telling you to get therapy, to begin to confront these pains, these shadows, because you're ready, because it's time, That can be a really, really difficult attitude to take about it. It can just feel like the world's piling on you. It's like, will you just leave me alone? What did I do to deserve all of this, But you have to look at it like, okay, this is happening now. This is coming to me now because it's time and I'm strong enough and wise enough and ready at this stage of life to confront it. And I don't see any other really useful way to look at it. And so here I am in another crucible, not a music crucible, but a renovation crucible. Ultimately, what's the renovation teaching me to confront or accept or alchemize, melt down, purify about my own self-concept? And ultimately, for me, it's still all about the ego stuff. Feelings of inadequacy are about ego. Feelings of not having any personal validation is ultimately an ego thing too. And the game for me continues to be releasing the ego, and I think I'm doing well at it. And then a new Crucible pops up and says, well, look, Kat, you're not doing as well as you thought. Or it's time for a new level of this. It's time to up level. And the problem is the up leveling means a new Crucible, and that means a burn, man. That means being in the fire again. And it's painful, all right? But if you are in the Crucible right now, in your relationships, in your job, in music, in whatever, your art, even physically, and that's a dangerous one too. And I do not want to belittle any of this stuff. I'm just trying to present a different way to look at your circumstances. Like I'm in a crucible right now. I'm being burned. I'm being melted. I'm being asked to purify some weakness in my character, some weakness in my lifestyle, some weakness in my belief about myself and the world. What is it? What's being asked of me to purify? And I'm trying to look at it that way right now. You know, music has been an incredible crucible for me and for a lot of other people too. Man, if you commit yourself to music, it will shake out your shadows. It will shake out your demons, man. And if you have a self-esteem issue, if you have a self-value issue, music will shake that out of you, man, to be melted. And you can walk away from that, or you can become more and more hardened and bitter about that, which I've done in the past. All it does is require a hotter fire later on. All it does, you harden yourself, is it means we need a hotter fire. And my advice to all of you is to just take the softest fire you can, which is the present fire. Because the longer you avoid dealing with whatever it is the crucible is drawing out of you, the hotter that fire has to get, man. I've learned that the hard way. I've learned that doubled over with gallbladder attacks. I've learned that in the throes of deep depression. Rather than confronting the issue that the crucible is bringing to me, I just get more and more depressed about it. Turn my back harder away from it rather than confronting it. I have not done well at this, all right? I am learning over time to accept these crucibles, to enter into these crucibles, and to try and learn what needs to be learned from the crucibles. And music has ultimately been the greatest for that. And then the pandemic just shot that up, you know, by degrees, as it were. And so that's what I'm here to tell you this week. I had other stuff, and I am going to go into one slight other topic. But I just want to present this notion of crucibles to you, because I know I say that all the time. Music is a wonderful crucible. And probably you're scratching your head like, what the hell is he even talking about? That's what it is. A crucible is a melting bowl, basically used in alchemy as a vessel for melting down and purifying metals, compounds, etc. And it's a great metaphor for life, man. Anything that is forcing you to face a fear, a jealousy, any weakness in your character is a crucible. And you can look at that with a certain degree of hope and optimism. It's like, okay, I'm being asked to purify. This is going to make life better. Once I get through this burn, I will be more pure. I will be stronger on the other side of this crucible. Before I get to really an exciting musical note, I will quickly do the Patreon plug. Yes, there is a Patreon page for this podcast. It is patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. If you are being edified, entertained, informed, educated, inspired, if you're just glad to tune in once a week and say, well, at least I'm not as messed up as that freaking guy. If you get something from that, maybe it's worth $5 a month to you. That is my one membership tier, $5 a month. Think of it, as I always say, of tipping me $1.25 for every episode I do. I've gone the Patreon route because ads drive me freaking crazy, and YouTube's got me on the edge. YouTube has got me one step from just forking over the freaking money to kill the ads because they drive me freaking crazy. And frankly, as you can tell from this episode, I don't need to be driven any further crazy, all right? Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. Out of the goodness of your heart, if you value what I'm doing here and you think these episodes are worth $1.25, please consider signing up for my Patreon and just sending me a little bit of boost that way. If you don't want to do that, that's cool. If you can't do that, that's totally fine. Please share the episodes. I had a chat with Ken the Zen yesterday about the ultimate value to me, to any podcast, of word of mouth. Just tell your friends, please. And when I put out teasers for the episodes, please share them. Or, just share the episodes yourself. If you think people can get something from this, if you are, maybe they can. Please consider sharing. It just helps me find a wider audience. It helps me grow the show, gives me more options, warms my cockles. I thank you so much, people who have done that. I have merch. Christmas is coming, kids. Christmas is coming. I have cool t-shirts. I have mugs. john-huff.com/shop. Would love it if you might consider purchasing a little bit of merch for the podcast lover in your life. And I thank everyone who has supported along the way. I've received several heartwarming messages, particularly over the past few weeks, as I've begun to skew more into this spirituality, personal development territory, which we all know I'm extremely reluctant to do. I have some cognitive dissonance about that, and that's a crucible too, I suppose. But people seem to be enjoying that content and identifying with and resonating with that content, and I'm really grateful to those of you who have written to tell me that, and thank you so kindly, everyone, for your support thus far. One of the people I've been in conversation with the past week is the great Steve Plimmer himself. Steve Plimmer, drummer for The Pears. The Pears are one of the hot bands around L-Town for sure, and beyond. Fabulous folk music, amazing vocal harmonies, lovely, lovely people. Really, really like them, really, really proud of them. And Steve is the drummer in that band, and that is a pretty freaking great gig to have, man. Steve reached out to me and we were talking. He's like, hey, I've been listening to a lot of Future Islands. And I said, what's Future Islands? And that is egg on my face, kids, because it turns out Future Islands has been around a long time, and they are an enormously popular pop band, ultimately pop band. We can split hairs on what genre this band fits into. But Steve knows I'm a huge War on Drugs guy, and he's like, if you like the War on Drugs, you might want to check out Future Islands. And so I did. And I've been listening to Future Islands all week. While I've been going through this crucible, at least I have had a cool new band, new to me, band to check out. Now, they describe their sound, Future Islands, as post-wave. Post-wave. All right, this is a band that is very synth, all right? The makeup of the band, drums, bass, synthesizer. That's it. No guitar. And a singer. And they do these really moody kind of jams to me. In fact, they have several records out. I started with their album Singles, released in 2014, because that's where they kind of blew up. They had stuff released before that, but they appeared on the David Letterman program. You're familiar with David Letterman? Yes, kids. 2014, when this record came out, they appeared and they played on Letterman a song called Seasons, Waiting on You. That's Seasons in parenthesis. And this is a dreamy, kind of dark synth pop song. And Dave went freaking nuts. You can watch this on YouTube. It's got over 300,000 views. And you could just tell by the end of this that Dave was like, you guys are great. I love this. And they are. But they're another one of these bands that has amassed an enormous following without any radio play. The War on Drugs is that too, as is The National. And you see these bands in this art rock, alternative rock world where there just isn't radio play. They do Tiny Desk shows. They do KEXP. They might be, if you have an alt or indie station in your city, they might appear on there, but otherwise not really in the mainstream, not really in the public consciousness. But then you go and you're like, let's see what they're like live. And they're playing in front of 40,000 people. It's like, how do I get into one of those bands, And Future Islands is just another one of them. And I say just another one as though they're in some way matter of fact or inferior. They're not. They're freaking great. And I dug into this Singles record because Seasons Waiting on You is from that album, and that's the song they played on Letterman. And that's the thing that kind of broke them to a much, much, much wider audience. And I just really like this band. It is synth poppy. It is, in a lot of cases, melancholy. They have this singer called Sam Herring or Sam Herring, who you can tell that the band is influenced by New Order, influenced by Joy Division. All right, there is a goth edge, particularly on their 2020 album, As Long As You Are. Like, he sings a little bit lower. There's a bit of a gothy vibe to some of this stuff. We talked a long time ago about the new wave phenomenon of the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s. This synth-driven, in those cases, a lot of shimmery guitars, but there's no guitar happening with Future Islands. But the synth covers this sort of atmospheric, swirly vibe, and then the bass just kind of holds the whole thing together, and this stuff happens around it. And Sam Herring has this kind of really angsty, artful, dramatic delivery. Those are just dudes in t-shirts. But you watch them play live. He's got an interesting voice, too. He sounds a little bit like Rod Stewart. Sounds a little bit like Elton John. He's got his own kind of edge. And then once in a while, he'll do like a screechy, screamy thing, like a Tom Waits thing. Just a lot of interesting things. And he's just a dude. Somebody watched, I think it was the Letterman appearance, and somebody wrote in the comments that it's like your phys ed teacher got a slot at the talent show and then popped up and blew everybody away. Sam Herring's a little bit like that, but he's got this really expressive delivery. Great showman, and this music is dramatic. This music is dark. This music is melancholic. And so I listened to the singles record that has that song on it. It's great. There's a song on there called A Song for Our Grandfathers, which is just beautiful. I mean, this music is music you get lost in. You know, I've been listening to a lot of the 80s rock that I love so much. I was going to talk about some of that. We'll save it for another time. And it is just all balls out attitude, crinkly nose, you know, guitar riffs, the whole thing. You know, this whole rock ethos, that whole vibe. And then you switch over to something like Future Islands, and it's just get lost in this music. Get lost in this soundscape, you know. And a lot of these songs don't really have choruses. That's like a kind of a trope or an idiosyncrasy of this alt-rock thing. Not a lot of really distinct choruses. And if you're like me, you come from the 80s world where it was all about big choruses, man, and fireworks and the whole thing. These songs tend to be a lot more subtle. And you get lost, not even so much in the music as just the vibe of it all. And so I'm listening to singles as I'm painting trim, and I'm just like, oh, I like this a lot. You know, Steve Blimmer, you nailed it, buddy. You know my sensibility. And I'm delighted to say this because, you know, in the evening, I'm working out and I'm watching a live Dirty Looks show from 1989 with my lip curled, all attitude. And then the next day I can be listening to this synth pop thing. And it makes me feel really as though I have a wide musical palette. And it's a lot wider than it used to be. And I'm delighted to report that, you know. So then I jumped ahead to the As Long As You Are album. It's their most recent, although I think they announced just today as I'm recording this, a new album for January of next year. So now's the time to jump on board, kids. And this record is just great. I don't know what else to say. There are so many songs on this album that I just love. It's great driving music, all right? We've talked about that. It's great driving music sometimes, you know, these sort of things that you get lost in, these atmospheric songs. If you go listen to As Long As You Are, the song For Sure, the song Born in a War, the song that I really love called City's Face. It's some great lyrics happening here. The lyrics to City's Face, all those years, just a shadow of a ghost, of a memory at most. And how you strayed, an arrow, where you go, where you been, where you came. This city, I'm sick and tired and wild. The city that I came to love, I'm leaving. Filled with a paranoia inside, trust left with the loss of my pride. I say, so long. It's so strange how a person can change a city's face, a time and place, who we know and believe. I believed for too long what you did to me wasn't wrong. I grew to hate you in this place too. This city, I'm sick and tired. Am I the one that forgot to love? I'm losing, filled with paranoia inside, trust left with the loss of my pride. I say, so long. It's so strange how a person can change a city's face. A person can change a city's face. And the strangers I came to know, they're all strange now. And the strangers I came to know, they're all strange now. Strange now. Deep stuff, man. And it is just as angsty and full of longing as you might expect. And live, they're great. And just really, Sam Herring is a great performer. It's one of these guys you just watch, you know. I really admire that. And I really love this band. And so if you're into the war on drugs, if you're into the National, if you're into some of that stuff, the alt rock, the art rock, Bon Iver, the earlier Bon Iver, and you have not listened to Future Islands, I am giving them a full endorsement. Right now, kids. And here's the deal, okay? A, I feel better. Doing something again. Take action, kids. One of the ways to shake yourself out of a funk is just to take action on something. Commit yourself to a project. Distract yourself. You know, if you're in an emergency state, distract yourself with something. You know, do something that takes your mind out of where it was. And so I have over the past 45 minutes or so. And I got to go, though, because it's Tuesday. I didn't get to record yesterday because I was on the road for a rehearsal. Fresh Breath is releasing our CD November 11th in Kingsville. It's going to be fun. We're prepping for that. So I'm recording on a Tuesday, which means a really, really fast turnaround time for me, which means I got to stop. Means I got to go. But I wanted to lay that Crucible stuff on you. If you're in a difficult situation right now, treat it as a refining or purifying process. Take a look at the crucible you're in and say, what is it forcing me to confront about myself? What feels bad here? And what does it mean about me and my beliefs and the way I function in the world? And you can use those crucibles to purify. You can use those crucibles to improve yourself and, as a corollary, as an extension, improve your life. That's what I'm about these days, and I gotta tell you, sometimes the fire burns, man. But if you go through it, if you become tested through it, you become purified, you become stronger on the other side. So hold on to that, please. Hold on to that, please. And in a perfect world next week, I'll be recording from my little studio, rebuilt, and a new era will dawn. Until then, thank you ever so much for listening. Do take care of yourself. Remember, good things happen when you put yourself out there. And hey, kids, I'll check you later. Yeah. I've been waiting on you. 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 Future Islands.